This video is designed to teach you about 45, 45, 90 triangles, which is considered one of the two types of special right triangles. So first off, I just want you to think about how many degrees are the angles in an isosceles right triangle. And we have an isosceles right triangle displayed right there for you to see. Hopefully you remember that an isosceles triangle is a triangle with two equal sides, and a right triangle is a triangle with one right angle. And so what we want to be thinking about is that all three angles together have to sum up to 180. The right angle takes up 90 degrees of that, so we've got 90 degrees left, which leaves us 45 and 45 for the other two angles, because an isosceles triangle has two equal angles. So this is an example of a 45, 45, 90 triangle. All right, one more question. If the lengths of one of the sides of a right triangle is 3, what are the lengths of the other two sides? So one of these sides is very easy to find out. It's an isosceles triangle, has two equal sides. Those legs are equal. So one of the sides is going to be 3. How do we figure out the hypotenuse? Well, we just talked about how to do that using the Pythagorean theorem. So let's set up the Pythagorean theorem. We end up with c squared equals 18. And then c is going to be the square root of 18, which we're going to want to simplify. We can rewrite c as the square root of 9 times the square root of 2, and we get 3 times the square root of 2. Now, this is not a coincidence that we have a 3, and then a 3 times the square root of 2. This is actually the pattern in every 45, 45, 90 triangle. The two legs are going to be equal, and then the hypotenuse is just going to be the length of the leg times the square root of 2. So you definitely want to draw this diagram in your notes. We have the two legs and the hypotenuse, that is the length of a leg times the square root of 2. So this diagram here is also potentially going to be helpful for you to solve the problems that we're about to do. So in each of these cases, we're going to have two legs and one hypotenuse. And like we said, the legs are equal. And the hypotenuse is the length of the leg times the square root of 2. So if we're trying to go from the leg to the hypotenuse, then we're just going to multiply times the square root of 2. But what if we want to go from the hypotenuse to a leg? Well, in that case, we are going to divide by the square root of 2. Let's look at a couple of examples. In this first one, we know that one of the legs is 9, which means the other leg is going to be 9, and the hypotenuse is going to be 9 times the square root of 2. In our example over here on the right, this time we know the hypotenuse is 7 times the square root of 2. So to get to the legs, we need to divide by the square root of 2, which means each of our legs is going to be 7. Both y and z equal 7. So those ones hopefully were pretty easy. These next ones are going to be a little bit more difficult because our expressions for our legs and our hypotenuse are not always going to be so nice. So for example, on this one with a and b, our hypotenuse is 8. So to find our legs, we need to divide by the square root of 2. But as we talked about in our video about multiplying and dividing radicals, we can't just write our answer as 8 over the square root of 2 because that's not considered simplified. So what we need to do is we need to rationalize that denominator. Multiply the top and the bottom by root 2 over 2. That means on top, we have 8 times the square root of 2. On bottom, we get the square root of 4, which equals 2. And then that 8 root 2 over 2 simplifies to 4 root 2. So a is equal to 4 times the square root of 2. And b is another leg, is just equal to a. So both a and b are 4 times the square root of 2. For this other triangle, we have one of the legs being the square root of 6. That makes finding the other leg very easy. The two legs are always equal. So c is the square root of 6. And d is going to be the square root of 6 times the square root of 2. Because to find the hypotenuse, we always multiply the leg times the square root of 2. So d is the square root of 12. But that can be simplified. If we want to simplify the square root of 12, it can be split apart into 4 times 3, and then the square root of 4 is 2. So our hypotenuse is 2 times the square root of 3.